Now, John with WAPTEK, off the cuff, here we go. So have you ever heard of the expanding Earth theory? Basically, the idea is that if you shrank the Earth, the continents will fit into place perfectly, and that the Earth gets mass from the light particles that pass through the outer core, which is less dense than the inner core. The inner core dense enough to catch the light particles, and over millions of years, the Earth slowly gains mass. I'm not sure that light could add mass to something. What do you think? Okay, there's several stages to this, so I'm just going to cover this pretty quickly. Now, this is going to be a condensed version of potholers doing this, because this is very popular, and I loved this idea because I'm one of many people I was born in just before 1970, and when I would look at the map, like a lot of kids, I noticed that North America and South America, if you pushed them together and got rid of the Atlantic, they would fit together pretty closely to where they would kind of mesh together with Africa and Asia and that sort of thing. At least it seemed that way. Or maybe it was the Pacific. I forgot which one. Well, the thing is that they seem to fit together. But do they? Okay, now this is the next part. Could the Earth have actually made itself larger? Now, the thing is, you don't say, no, that can't happen. You say, how would this mechanism work? The first thing you do with the Earth is you recognize what pieces are really the continents. These are based on the continental shelf edges. The continental shelf edges are not the continents. Every video you see on the internet that talks about, or every page that talks about the expanding Earth theory, instead of simply addressing that the continents are not the same shape as what you see above the ocean level, they argue. This is a very big tip-off that they're being at least a little disingenuous. The person who originally came up with this is a perfectly plausible idea. I mean, you know, without any other information, it doesn't sound that strange. The Earth could have simply expanded for some reason. It doesn't have to be light particles. It could be something else, like something else being added to the Earth and it adding to the volume of the Earth. Or maybe you could decide that it's material in the Earth that is normally dense that is becoming less dense, expanding and making the Earth bigger. It could stay the same mass, it could stay the same effective weight, but it could be things like uranium breaking down and becoming lighter elements and becoming more expanded. The thing is that some of the elements, if you don't know this, from that, I'm just going to cover that really quick. Some elements that you derive from heavier elements are actually more dense total. Also, lost energy, lost mass, it wouldn't necessarily expand, but let's say that was possible. Do the continents actually fit together that way if you look at the continental shelf edges? Because that's what you have to look at. Also be warned that if you look at the continental shelf edges, you'll notice pieces that appear to have been cracked or they look like they have growth lines. When you look at it, you find out that none of the pieces actually fit together that way, except, and it's still just this area, just the ones that we know about that would have formed Pangea. They barely fit together today because over time they've changed shape as well. Sometimes having material added from volcanic eruptions all the way to whatever. But the continental shelves do fit together, but only fit together in some places. They do not fit together to form a smaller Earth. That's the first step. That doesn't mean that the Earth didn't crack and do this. It just means, you know, we might be missing an Atlantis, for instance. How about that idea? Well, when you look at it, you find out that the expansion caused by the actual progression underneath the sea, and in some cases not under the sea, that causes the Earth to change shape, makes that not happen. You have to look at a sometimes called a naked or dry globe image to do this. So it isn't. It's an interesting theory, and it was intriguing, but it had 2 or 3 flaws. Number one, when it was pointed out the continental shelves are what you're supposed to pay attention to instead of coastlines, people became very defensive and did not go with the flow. They didn't try to figure out how that could work. Could have still worked, but then they became really obnoxious about it. And then, okay, now it's sounding like snake oil. I don't know if it really is. I mean, it could be still valid. I'm not kidding. But the other idea that light was absorbed, this is an attempt at just deflecting any criticism, because the original idea is that the Earth simply expanded and they didn't know why. They were trying to come up with a way why. The easiest way is that radioactive decay caused elements to become much less dense. That's a simple one. That however, doesn't explain the continental shelves or the expansion in the oceans. So if anybody's curious, that's my opinion on it, and that's actually looking into the assertions. Now, the big red flags here are, number one, evasive behavior by people who are advocates of it, in most cases, if not all. Next, tricksterism. I'm just going to call it tricksterism. People who play games with words and invoke conspiracy theories. There's no conspiracy theory about this. People said the same thing about tectonic plate theory, right? Yes, some people actually did. But they were laughed at and forgotten because tectonic plate theory actually has some practical value. It helps us figure out what is causing the earthquakes. It also tells us if this is going on, you should see this movement or this movement on these two places, and that movement happens. This also includes finding out how we ended up with the Himalayan mountains, and that's, well, the Himalayas, and many other things. And also made it to where we could predict where maybe another island would form in the ocean, or what would be the deepest part of the ocean, that sort of thing. It had predictive value. This one doesn't really give us anything in return for advocacy of it. Now, I'm perfectly okay with somebody proving me wrong in this, because honestly, this is one of the things that really doesn't matter. Even tectonic plates don't really matter in most people's everyday lives. Until a tsunami happens, and then suddenly it's keenly important. And that's the other thing about this. This also posits the idea that the Earth has an end game. It doesn't. It also posits that it was much more violent in the past. Well, yeah, but very far back in the past. So, if anybody has anything to contribute, not an argument or name-calling, please put it below. But if anybody's curious, again, the expanding Earth theory, when it was pointed out that it was simply wrong on some areas, instead of adjusting the hypothesis or theory or finding out why it didn't work, people got defensive, and that's a big red flag. The next thing is, the idea of light being added in or something of that nature was used instead of saying, I don't know why it's expanding. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. People didn't know why we had continental drift going on. We found out now, we found out since then, there's a lot of convection currents, very slow ones, with lava. Because lava can be, very close to a liquid, because you can see that in an eruption. It's just a very frightening thing to find out that we're basically floating on liquid or semi-liquid material. But anyway, that's my opinion on it. That's what I've been able to learn about it. And I was at one time an advocate of this idea because it seemed like a perfect solution. They'd solve a couple of ideas out as problems, but it doesn't hold any water. Matter doesn't expand that way. And an easy one. Radioactive decay. That wasn't picked. No, it had to be light absorption, which the mechanism doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. Neutron capture would cause this, at least hypothetically. But that wouldn't account for the mass increase either. If anybody has anything to post, please post it below, and let's... this is an interesting subject. I really think it's interesting. But this isn't an area where I'm going to accept an argument with a certain Large Hadron Steven Collider Christ and have them play games. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And that was a good